everybody welcome Ris and Danny.
Hey everyone.
Danny, would you like to introduce yourself briefly, and I can go?
Sure, absolutely, yeah. I mean, as Juliet said, Riz, myself, we all work together. I think we've worked together now for a good almost 3-4 years, it feels. So it's been a while, really. In my case, I think also for context, I think in terms of discussing feedback, like Riz and I also work as like they're my manager, but also like mentor, close friend, and we've over the years really started understanding how to refine feedback and methods that work for each of us. So I think we can definitely discuss that a bit more. For context, yeah, I'm a senior product designer, specifically kind of focusing more on the mobile side, at least in terms of this team. And yeah, stoked to get into this once we begin. I'll pass it to you, Rose.
Yeah, thanks, Danny. I mean, I think that was a pretty good introduction. Yeah, we're on the design team. My name is Ris. My pronouns are they, them. I started as a senior product designer. Now I'm I guess like a lead product designer plus product manager. And yeah, Danny and I have been working together for a long time now, I guess. And we started, I guess, like as, like more like peers, like a little bit of a mentorship, mentee situation, which got a little bit more formalized as we worked, as I kind of became a manager and kind of grew into that role. Still fairly new to it, but, mentoring is something that I really love to do. And yeah, I guess I'm really excited that we're able to kind of share our process and this idea that you can, like work together and give feedback together in like a safe environment that essentially benefits everyone, right? Like I think there's I quite dislike hierarchy, and I might mention that quite a few times during this, but that the idea of being a mentor and being a mentee to me is like a relationship that is on equal footing. And allows each of us like learn from each other. But yeah.
Oh, it's just Juliet messaging.
It's just me messaging.
Already questions already?
Yeah, already. That's something that I wanted to ask you. Are you open to questions as we go, or are you going to have? I know that we have a space for questions at the end, but I will leave it up to you. I could facilitate the questions, or I mean, it's two of you too, so I will leave it up to you two, though.
I'm pretty cool with questions as they come up.
Yeah. Nice to. We can do this kind of like a little bit of a panel discussion. So happy to do that.
I have my questions ready all the time. Perfect. So yeah, everybody, make sure that you put the questions in the comments. We will go through the questions as they come up. So I feel like they're really relevant to the topic that is going on. So make sure that you put the questions. And yeah, go ahead.
I think first, I think it would be really helpful to maybe set the context, right? So as of late, I was thinking about restarting my portfolio, kind of starting from ground up. I think like when I was a student, roughly 4 years ago, I had a case study that was more student work, and I think one sort of freelance piece that I had. And then 4 years later, I think this was just a period where I was thinking like, hey, I think it's time to, not necessarily for even job hunting, but I think the thing that I would discuss with Riz was I just want to have something that represents who I am now as a designer, because it's been 4 years. And if I want to even have a chat and maybe sort of, have something to show, it's more accurate to where I am as a designer today. So I think that's where like this idea came about that, okay, Q4 of this year, things will slow down a little bit on our work front. That's kind of where it began, I guess. And I think I think the first thing that I remember thinking was give myself enough of a runway where it doesn't feel like high pressure, but it just feels like I can organically start chipping away at things, because I was just starting from scratch. And I think at this point I felt way more confident in even like my own design language as a designer. And I think the first thing we did was really just like mood boarding. I remember Riz had this idea or this concept called like your respirations.
Yes,
Do you remember that? Yeah.
I do. I still have. I'm
Yeah, I
happy
think
to share that file too. I
yeah,
did
that
a
was
Figma
huge.
file. Yeah.
So if we're talking like linear, I mean, it's not a linear process, but if we're talking just like linear steps, I think that was one of the first things that was a real like aha moment. Essentially, what it is Riz just had a Figma file that was essentially like a Pinterest collage of just anything that represented their vibe, their design language, anything they were interested in. I was just kind of collecting inspiration in this like one ever evolving sort of living document. And I think conceptually that sounds so simple, but at the time I was like, oh my God, because I just have so many like random bookmarks or, you know, screenshots or what may have you. And I think that was such a good grounding initial starting point to just take time to refine and understand. And I think it was really fun because I guess, and Riz, you can talk about this more, but Riz also has we both have different like other design discipline backgrounds. So I come from a sound design background. I also come from like a very like DIY music, like punk rock background where I was really into like making stickers. And so like early days of like understanding visual design, like album covers for friends and like cracked versions of like Photoshop and all of that. So I didn't really know what I was looking at, but I knew I liked it. And then Riz, if you want to talk about like your background, we can explain how maybe I would share something with you and then you were able to kind of give me guidance like, oh, this is like classic print design or like, you know, and how you started giving me context of what I was looking at. I think that was huge.
Yeah. I think that was what made me think of it. Was something again I kind of encourage is that I think where it started as well was kind of that idea of like looking at your work that you've done, and you know, like the portfolio itself is, you know, like a byproduct of that, right? Like it's kind of like the idea of that, hey, like this is actually how much you've grown and achieved, and like, you know, like how like you want to keep growing and you know, like the refining your design language. But yeah, like my background is in illustration and animation, so very, again, like very visual, very like mood board focused. And it was very helpful for me to see kind of like things that I really liked and like put them together. And yeah, that was like the whole like the DIY like Pinterest almost. And then sharing that with Danny and both of us kind of like looking at that stuff together was, I think, like helpful for both of us to think about how like, yeah, like Danny's like kind of like, oh, these are the things that like you like, and I can look at it and say like, oh, like this actually reminds me of like something else. It's kind of like we're like playing off it, you know, like it's that like rapport, that back and forth of when you see something and you have an idea and you're kind of like going off of it. It's a little bit like improv almost, you know, like you're like yes and I think that's the part that I really like about, you know, when you kind of like mentioned it, you're like, hey, like I want to, there's this like this visual language that I kind of want to like work on and refine, but not really knowing what direction it should be going. Having someone else there, like having a few other people there, like I think it's that kind of like feedback rapport of being able to have, you know, folks who are like, oh yeah, like, hey, like I actually know this, like I actually think I thought of this because I saw this. I think is always really super helpful. But yeah, I think thank you for reminding me of that. That was really fun.
That was great. Yeah. And it was so useful I think maybe that's a whole other part of this discussion also in terms of like understanding and organically being able to connect with I think even finding who you trust to give you feedback. I think it's very easy to ask everyone in the sun and then maybe you get like 20 opinions and then you maybe get in your head a bit more. I think like, and I think this is a step back, but and a whole other discussion. But yeah, I think one thing is also like, I would say, at least from like the receiving end, it's really comforting to have one source that you trust, or not just one, but I mean, just like, you know, with Riz, it was like, of course I would get feedback then on the side from, I don't know, my partner. I'd ask her or I'd ask one of our other coworkers if we were discussing anything portfolio related. But I think if I was getting too much contradictory and too much like different forms, because all some of it's obviously subjective, right? It's just whatever you're into. So I think finding someone that you trust and who understands what you're trying to do, I think that's also a really big piece. That's something to think about, at least, you know. Otherwise, I found it quite overwhelming back in the day, at least from like the student times when I was just starting out. Was there a question in there?
It's me. I'm going to ask you a question.
Yeah.
And I feel while I ask, I just did a pool.
Okay.
We have these pool thingies and all these features for Google use them. So make sure that people answer this. Have you had someone to give you feedback on your portfolio before? And my question is like, this relationship feels so natural, yes? Like between Riz and Danny to give feedback. But what do? We don't have this cool thing that the two of you have. Like, how do we ensure that we have someone where we feel safe and at the same time we can be vulnerable and we can ask questions? Like, what would be a step to follow?
Great question.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, this is something that I've been pondering about a lot, right? Like, I think I wrote down a note about how I have a lot of like I'm very hesitant about like speed portfolio reviews, like things like that, like speed meetups and you know, like, not to say that I think a lot of those like have their place, and I think they are important for you to be able to connect with different people. But I really I do genuinely think that it's worth taking time to build like, you know, like connections and relationships. I think just like in general, like, right, like with the, I don't know, like ongoing state of the world, like I'm not going to get political about this, right? Like, you know, genocide and oppression and like, you know, like the state of the world, that right now it's really important to be building those genuine connections and community. And so if you are able to, you know, like find people, or like even if it's just like connections briefly, and to me it's almost kind of like not starting with the idea of like, hey, like I need to build my portfolio, I need feedback, but sharing any kind of like Danny and I share a lot of like mutual, you know, like things that we like, you know, we talked about tattoos a lot. Like we both have a lot of tattoos. And that's kind of what we connected on initially, and like a whole host of other things as well, right? But as Danny mentioned, like we are like friends as well as being coworkers and, you know, mentor-mentee. So I think for me, a lot of that is trying to seek out people, and I think this is like lovely. Like I love this, like things like this that Juliet has, that, you know, like where you're able to have this group of people that you start kind of building these genuine connections with, and then from there, when you want feedback, it's being able to feel like you can, now you're like, hey, actually I know some people who might be able to give me good feedback on my whatever I'm designing or building or my portfolio.
Totally.
Yeah, I think that's.
Maybe I want to even then. Oh, Danny, yeah, go ahead. Maybe you're going to answer what I'm going to ask you.
Maybe, I don't know. I just wanted to add that, and then I think from like my perspective, I think the best analogy I can give, I'm just going to give another like musical analogy, just because that's how my brain will sometimes work. But I think of the word like chemistry a lot. If I am working, if you look at like, let's say a band, you don't need to have the best bass player. You need to like, and that's not going to make your band sound better. It's chemistry that's going to make your band sound better. How you work together, how you communicate, how close you are, how, you know, when you're touring, can you spend 200 days a year together stuck in a van? You know, those are things that actually will impact the quality of, let's say, for example, this band. And I think it doesn't, as Ris said, it never has to be like a hierarchical thing. You know, it's not that you need necessarily to look for a more senior designer to be the one giving you feedback necessarily. It's just about chemistry. And I think that the positive output of good chemistry is that then a relationship, the feedback feels so much more organic and safe and just trustworthy. That's all.
Yeah, I feel like it was going around a that part too, but is when did you decide, okay, I have a great relationship with Riz, then when we move it on to like, I'm building my portfolio, and I think I need some help, like when this interaction comes into place?
Pretty organically and kind of shamelessly on my part too. Like if I had, I was just like, I've decided I want to, I guess to Riz's point though, I will say like, we set up like weekly syncs, and we have a cadence where we catch up and we'll talk about anything from tattooing to what may have you. And I think it was just around that time where this idea kind of floated. And again, it wasn't like, okay, now moving forward, we're just going to discuss portfolio stuff. But I think when I decided it was something I wanted to sort of sink my teeth into, I just had such a strong relationship with Riz where it just made organic sense. The way you want to tell your partner when you have a good day at work, when you have a bad day, or, just you want to just share what's going on in life. So I was just like, I'm thinking about, restarting this portfolio now. And they were just like, yeah, like let's, we just ended up chatting about it very organically, so to speak. So, but I think it goes back to maybe the runway thing. It wasn't like, oh, it needs to be done by this month or anything like that. And later on, I'm happy to, share and explain how like the feedback process worked and where I'm at right now and all of that. But yeah, I don't know if that answers the question though.
Yeah, I think one last thing I would add to that is that, like it was very organic. I think when you started asking about portfolio, I kind of want to go back to the thing where we, talk about like feeling like psychologically safe, right? Like when you're with kind of someone that you trust and is, and also, but the difference is like between, in like psychological safety, it's like, it's judgment free. So it's kind of like, like I was there and I'm like, I knew you want to work on this, but it's also not critique free, if that makes sense. Like part of psychological safety is also like that you know that you have empathy and you're not going to be judged, but also feedback, like, like radical candor is appreciated and accepted. And, so I think there's also like this, I don't know if it's like not necessarily like an agreement, but there's knowledge that I felt, and I don't want to like put words in your mouth, but that you were I feel safe in asking for like feedback, but knowing that it wasn't going to be, oh, like, yeah, like it looks nice, right? Like it's not like to your feelings, that it's like, hey, this is actually going to be helpful in your work. So
absolutely.
I think just want to make sure that like is defined there. It's like it's not just about finding folks who are going to say, yes, everything looks perfect and amazing and I love your work, right? But also that I love your work, but like this is what you can work on. This is actually, like critique, right?
Absolutely.
I love that. And I feel like that's one of the questions that I was going to make, as I feel like it's more like a society kind of a standard. If we are friends, I support you, and I say that everything is nice and it looks great. But I feel like this is one of the most important parts of like mentorship or feedback, is coming with love and say, I want this person to grow and do their best. So how can we do it together? And that's giving honest feedback about it.
And I would argue that with friendships, that is also important. That
with everything,
definitely. I know, but again, I'm coming from the standards of society of like you always say nice stuff, and you don't want to hurt the other person when that's hurting person not being honest and coming. Yeah. No one have answered the question. Okay, I just have 3 votes. Come on, people. Have you have someone to give you feedback on your portfolio? There is a pool. Okay, sorry, I interrupt you. Let's see if we get more points, more votes. So everybody has said yes. Our 3 votes have said yes. I have had feedback on my portfolio. Ooh, okay, start moving around. You can continue. Yes.
I was thinking about for context, we all used to work with a company called Ink Blot Therapy, now acquired by Green Shield, and we have there you go, the mug. We have a part of our network, part of the different, I guess, services we were able to offer. We have like a practitioner network, and I remember speaking with their acronym is PNO, but our practitioner network, I remember speaking with them, and kind of similar to what they had mentioned about approaches to care, right? Certain counselors will do a technique called like parroting, and it's more like kind of like the bird, where it's like you parrot, you will repeat and just be like, okay, that's great, and just create a space where you can someone may just like share how they're feeling, etc. Whereas certain approaches of care come with a little bit more like, let's ask why, let's challenge it further, let's dig deeper. And I think from a feedback lens, again, as the one perhaps asking and receiving, and not that it's one way, but just in the context of that, it is really important to not be like too like healthily be emotionally detached from like what you're initially designing and trying to flesh out, you know. It's okay to, it's probably the one, let's call it a product, for example. It's probably the one product I've overthought the most, because I'm like, this is me, this is not the company I'm working for, it's not any freelance work that I'm doing, it's not any consulting work, this is like me. And then I unnecessarily built that up to the point where I felt like it's like, I guess this is the more philosophy side of it, but as if it's this one and done document or like product, right? It's ever evolving. It's always going to evolve. Like any product, you can also break it down into thinking about, hey, what does version 1 look like for me if I have a timeline, if I need to start applying for work, if I want to have it ready for X event or whatever, you know? I think it's okay to also, I think it's important rather, not even okay to maybe have like an idea of what perhaps like a V3 would be, but it maybe focus on executing V1, you know, and like see where that takes you too, because that's kind of what happened in my case. I'd approached Riz with, when we started doing like the inspiration, I think one of the things that came up was thinking about also like content strategy and what do I want this portfolio to have, right? And what does it represent? And I was going through this confusion because I consult on a lot of sound design and audio UX projects. I do a lot of freelance work and contract work for different like mobile apps and stuff. And then I have my 9-to-5, this team that we're working with, and I want to showcase that too. And so the initial idea was, can we create a portfolio, almost like a website, where I want to show all these services, and like a user can choose between wanting sound design and you know, product design, and that's how someone could navigate my site. And there were so many ideas coming from that, but it sort of ended up being the response, or sorry, the way wherever we've landed now ended up being more like treating it as like a single service space. So you can land on the site and see all the different services I can offer, but I'm promoting like a certain one that I'm really proud of right now, for example. And so I think like thinking about these things and realizing there's going to be multiple versions. I think one idea we had, which I still love, which is doing like audio guided, because I do so much sound design. We're like, would it be cool if I could do like an audio guided tour, not only for accessibility, but just to showcase like this other layer within the site, you know? I'm like, that'd be amazing, but maybe that's like a V2 thing, you know? So what can I do right now to set up for that? I saw a question right now pop up, right?
Yeah, I saw the question too, and actually I think I was going to jump on what you were saying, and I think I can answer the question.
Perfect. Yeah.
At the same time, sorry, I closed the thing and now I have to open it up again. How do I see comments?
I can read it.
So yes.
I was going to read it for you.
Thank you.
Okay, Danny, go ahead, Danny.
Sure, yeah. As mentioned earlier, there are a diverse number of portfolios, even just within design. There's product design, UX design, UX UI design, service designer, etc. How do you provide feedback for those who want portfolio evaluation from peers who are not going into the same specialty or subcategory that you have decided? That's a cool question.
Yeah, that's a great question.
I thoughts on that too.
I love that because I love actually like getting feedback from folks who are outside of your like circle or like knowledge domain is actually amazing, because then you're getting like a diversity of feedback that you may not normally get, because, you know, like it's something that we do all have. And I like, you know, I know like we all have our own biases, right? So I know that I am biased towards a certain kind of perhaps like portfolio visually or like style, whatever it is. And so like to kind of jump on what Danny said, and also this question is, I think there's also a little bit of like what Danny was really great about this was like kind of like knowing kind of feedback you're looking for. So it's, and to me, like it kind of boils down to asking questions, right? Whether you're giving feedback or receiving feedback. So when you're kind of like building a portfolio or you're presenting it, it's kind of like, what kind of feedback are you looking for? What are your goals with your portfolio, right? Like, is it something to do with like clarity? Are you showcasing a particular skill? Are you showing up a specific experience in an area? Things like that. I think like knowing what your aim is for your portfolio is really important. And then I think another thing that I like really liked about Danny's portfolio and what we talked about a lot is also kind of putting that personality in, right? So it's like, even if I don't necessarily understand the same specialty, it's like, but I can tell from that, you know, like the language of your portfolio, whether it's sound, whether it's visual, whether it's typography, whether it's just written, if it's just content, I get the sense of what kind of personality, what kind of like vibe, I guess you could say, you know, you're going for, right? And I think that is actually really by itself like really helpful. And then the other thing about that, again, like getting feedback, providing feedback, is that having a framework for, I guess, like explaining your portfolio, and again back to that asking questions, right? Like asking like, what do you want out of this feedback? So when you're asking for feedback, it's also knowing that you're able to tailor your like your work to someone who doesn't share your domain knowledge. And I think that across the board is really important. That's something that I emphasize a lot. Even with design, for example, again, like the work that we're in, is that most of the time you are presenting your work or showing your work off to folks who don't understand design, like who don't have this deep knowledge, who don't understand like what user experiences or your, you know, an app is, or digital design. And so it's really important for you to be able to explain that. And I think part of that is also like part of how you can approach building a portfolio, is thinking about how could this be perceived by other folks who are not necessarily have this like very deep knowledge of whatever you're presenting. Because it's you know, something I think about a lot, and I love too, is like communications in science, right? Like I really love science. I'm not a scientist, I'm not in science, but I have a vast interest in like biology and things like that. And I really appreciate it when someone is able to kind of like break down concepts and explain it. And I'm like, oh, I learned something, but I didn't have to, you know, actually go into, you know, like a 4-year research degree to be able to understand it. And anyway, so I think that to me is like very inspirational. Totally. And I hope that kind of answers the question too, and like it helps, because again, I think Danny, like you did a really great job with your portfolio when you were trying to like ask these questions about like how should I put more content in here, should I put less content in here, like is this too much, is this too little, right? I think that was really helpful.
I'll also add, I think what really worked about, I think earlier in this call you mentioned about it not being like the sort of top-down one-way street in terms of like feedback and receiving feedback. Earlier this year, Ris and Julia know, like I too began sort of speaking to early stage designers, and of course, I'm not expecting any designer come and necessarily have the same discipline within design as me. And someone I was helping out with their portfolio was doing like virtual reality and designing for virtual reality, and I don't know anything about that field, that industry. That I didn't know how to understand how they were trying to even like exhibit that online, and it was super useful because I got so many ideas from what they were doing, because it was a discipline I wasn't aware of, and I was like, oh, that's amazing. How can I implement that into my own portfolio as well, right? And to Riz's point, it was great because then we got to refine their portfolio. So even if someone doesn't really understand too much about virtual reality, they can navigate this portfolio and actually come out with like some newfound knowledge too, you know, even if it's just like a little bit of a tidbit. So yeah, I hope that answers that question.
As we are at 8:35, I was thinking that Danny and Riz, could you show us a little more or something more tangible as like
visual?
Yes, this is exactly how we've been working together. So in that way, everybody can go home and say, okay, this is something that I can do together with someone else. And an example, I feel like is, again, I'm a visual person, and I think a lot of us are. So yes, sorry to rush you.
Yeah, no. We want to be cognizant of everyone's time as well. Danny, did you want to? I was thinking about this. Maybe you could show. I think if
I've got a few. Yeah, I've got some. We can do like maybe a bit of like a little bit of like playground and some takeaways we took, and then maybe where the portfolio is now. I'm like happy to share. If that,
I'm excited to see this as I was like digging into your LinkedIn. Is like, where is this portfolio? So is this like a pre-release kind of idea?
I think this is like 85% there. I think we just have to, now I'm doing like the stuff that I find the most time consuming, which is just like getting the right hi-fi asset to put in and making sure it doesn't look pixelated and stuff. But what I will show is a little bit of, I mean, I can just pull some really basic things together just to get the idea going here. I'll start sharing screen first.
Yeah, while Danny's doing that, I think one thing I also wanted to mention is I know that as we were working, something that I kind of thought about and we kind of gave feedback on, went back and forth, is the idea of, obviously we have lots of folks that work that is under like NDA, right? Like under like non-disclosure agreements, like things that like may or may not be like appropriate or like, you know, good to put publicly. So I think that was something to do with, you know, like, and again, like, you know, the difference between, and not the difference, it's, you know, there's the portfolio and the website. You know, Danny was very focused on building a website as well. So there's like that front facing, you know, like what I'm working on or what I have, but then also like for a deeper portfolio for, you know, being interviewed, things that folks probably cover later in other sessions, is that, you know, like we kind of talked a lot about what parts of your portfolio or website could be more like a teaser or like a trailer to your actual work, right? Like thinking about it that way also was really beneficial in a way of like building your case studies. And again, I'm sure, you know, like this will get covered in later sessions, but the idea of, you know, choosing your case studies and which ones you want to showcase and building them out in like a fulsome portfolio of like case study like content, but then almost like taking those and like pulling out like what can I show as a teaser, like on my website, like on LinkedIn, on things like that, is a structure I think that may be helpful to a lot of folks, because it is overwhelming to say like, you know, start a website and then go, okay, like, well, I have, you know, like 10 things I want to show, and then trying to work on all of them or trying to, you know, work on the pages. But rather it's about, you know, thinking about your portfolio in several pieces, almost like the way that you would do, you know, like if you're working on an animation or a movie or something, right? Like you obviously you build the core part of it first. You gather all the things that you've been working on, but that work doesn't necessarily need to be shown publicly, right? That to me is more like, hey, that's the piece that we were working on, like the feedback or whatever, and then like using that as a way to decide what's, you know, like what kind of like posters do I want to show up as, like kind of how do I want to release this, like do I just want like a really short trailer, like a, you know, like a snippet of like, hey, this is a cool thing I worked on.
Huge.
But like when you actually go into an interview, that's when you're actually going to be or a recruiter, you're going to actually like show the full thing.
I love this, and I feel like this is a concept that everybody is coming this week, that is like more like a portfolio deck versus like your live side. like if you imagine again, the same example that Reese is saying is, if you have a movie, you're not going to put the whole movie in your website because then it just you lose the concept of people going and spending the money and seeing in the theater with all the effects. Yes, just put in a trailer, and then when you are in the streets, you see the poster. Yeah, so you see little things that they keep touching. The connections between who you are, what is your brand, what do you value, what are your strengths, and then the big show comes when you have your portfolio deck, when you're showing all the things that you can do, and that keeps like growing. Let's say if you go into a interview process, these feeling of who you are just keep growing, and you just keep showing a little more and more. So I love this concept. Sonia, do you have a question?
Yeah, thank you for recognizing me. So I was wondering what you thought about doing a Loom, because Loom, you have free 25 5 minutes or up to 5 minutes, but it's also more accessible and inclusive because you can edit the transcripts for accuracy. So if nobody knows about those, I just wanted to share that thought and see what you thought about it.
Reese love them.
I love
Loom.
I am not sponsored. I am not sponsored by Loom, but if Loom wants to sponsor me or us, please feel free to sponsor us. Yeah, but no, I love that. Thank you for bringing that up, Simon. Yeah, I love Loom. I love video recording. We work. Well, our team does work asynchronously, so that actually is just something that should be integrated into our work process anyway. But like I think integrating Loom into your portfolio, like that's something that I think Danny and I even talk, like I think something we kind of like played around with is the idea that, because Danny does sound design, was almost like, can we integrate that, like taking bits and pieces again, like that thing that I talked about, like your own experience, your own background, like whatever your strengths are. And I was like, hey, like what about like you record yourself like actually narrating some of your work, right? And then you can like do the sound design on it, because then it kind of shows that your experience and stuff, like things like that, I think is also really awesome. And shout out to Loom with like they have like transcripts and then you can like rewatch things. Yeah.
I think what I can do then in that case is, why don't we just go to the live site instead of showing it? Because there's so many examples of this that we can just kind of dig into.
As you show maybe your screen, Danny, and I feel like this is a great question from Sonia, like a good point, is like how can you make different mediums to communicate your portfolio, because you never know who is watching and how they're going to interact with your work. So I feel like this is powerful. And another thing that is always like, oh yes, as a designer, I know how to present. Show it. And I feel like this is such a good way of like, instead of telling, you're showing, is really powerful. So yeah, thank you, Sonia, for that. Yeah, yes. Go ahead, Danny.
Absolutely. And I think, I love showing work in progress. I think it's way more insightful than just seeing the polished thing, so we can just go through it together. For me, this is a small thing, but because a lot of my work comes from like freelance and client work comes from having either word of mouth or being passed or referred, I wanted to make sure that in case someone did go on my website, there's just information as to why it's currently down, kind of thing. So I have this like lock screen here just to give a little context. I think that's important just in general, if you already have like a live URL or anything like that. So when we get in, I can start talking about what kind of the thoughts behind the design so far. So first we land here. Basically just lets you know that I'm multidisciplinary designer, and then copy was a huge piece, and I'm happy to get into that next time or whenever, or if anyone wants to reach out and ask questions about it. But basically the language that I was trying to use for my portfolio was speaking to what I value as a designer. So I really value ideas and designs that breathe intention. And I want to show that I've, got a big focus on research. I've got a big focus on strategy. I love collaboration. And then at the end of the day, I love precision. These are like kind of keywords that came up from, like taking time to sit and marinate us onto what is like the brand of me, so to speak. Not from like a kind of gross branding kind of way, but just from like a who am I as a designer. Underneath, this is another thing, a little just like a kind of nod to some of the work and clients that I've worked with. Again, this is maybe more specific for some of the freelance work where you kind of want to show some social proof, etc. Not saying it's required. It just felt like it was it felt very organic to do so in terms of just quickly representing who I've worked with in the past. Then you go down and you'll quickly realize I love huge typography. And this is a good example of what we were talking about earlier, where I was telling Riz, I love big text, and Riz is like, oh, it's very editorial, it's very this. And I'm like, oh my God, what are these terms? And start Googling it and suddenly realize and discover more and understand how to read large print text, things like that. So you'll quickly realize where that kind of comes into play. There's like the Google Meet things here too. So the one thing I wanted to do is I didn't want to waste too much time in terms of perhaps someone's jumping on my site. I wanted to immediately see a portfolio piece, like a case study that I'm really proud of. So right after this sort of big welcome, the minute they scroll down, you enter your first case study. So this is like featured work, a little bit, again, very editorial, almost looks like kind of like a magazine or something like that, and I also love photography. So then there was a lot of discussion once it came down to assets, how I want to make like anything digital. I want that to be part of like the case study, but any of the photography or anything I want it to be film photography that is my own. So for example, here now is a placeholder image of how I would have a actual, like the app in hand. And then underneath, the idea is to have the UI elements from that screen just showcasing there, just so because it's kind of fun and playful. So just kind of gridding it, Underneath that, then we get into my about section. So a little bit more about me. That felt very organic. We played around with different layouts and what felt accessible and testing it between, screen sizes and stuff. In terms of practical tips, again, at any point, reach out in just terms of like, I could go on and on about things like, like saving certain sections and start templating what you're designing. So you can like play around with it more and switch versions and all of that, but I'll save that for another time. Then underneath, I just wanted to put in some I'm still kind of iffy about this too, because I find it a bit odd, but yeah, kind words. I've put some placeholder stuff. And then lastly, just a little bit about the work that I do on the side as well. And then a nice big chunky footer with, again, ridiculously large text, because I'm really into that. We'll talk about that trailer piece really quick too in a sec, but I just wanted to go through again, like, on the top then, something that was important for me was to explain all my services, right? And I kind of realized that at the end of the day, whoever jumps on the site is likely gonna know what they're looking for when they come to search for me, especially at least where I'm at in my career. It's not like you search, multidisciplinary designer and I'm the first thing that shows up, right? Obviously. So the odds of them finding my site, they'll already know what they're looking for. But if they were curious, we're like, okay, let's place that as like a tier 2 action, like something that they can dig into later. So that's kind of where we have then the services section. Again, huge text. And then as you go down, you can better understand all the different things that I do, whether it's like product design, whether it's UX design, whether it's consulting, audio UX, whether it's, training and workshops. So it's just like a nice place to house that information. About section, just if they wanted to flesh out more, or from like the landing page, if they were like, oh, learn more, there's a CTA there. Just further kind of diving a little bit deeper into my background, what I, want to pursue as a designer, quick link to download the resume, some more photography, a little bit about like my personal background, a little bit of information about what I think is really valuable as like something that I like have high value towards in terms of, I don't know, my responsibilities as a designer. And then, yeah, just tagging that piece again from the dash. So when we go to select works, for example, you'll see that same really big initial one that I'm like featuring right now. And then you would see like 2 smaller ones that I also will have case studies for. And we'll start with like this featured one. Basically, this is kind of where I'm working at right now. So when you go to view work, you're going to first see this sort of big banner, and this is where all those this is where it turns into more digital photography, right? It's not so much natural, organic, like film photography or anything like that. It's more digital assets. A little bit, we're like, okay, let's impact the user with like, this big, beautiful flush screens of different screens of this product. And as we go down, we want them to understand a little bit about what this product is. And then, the classics, just like the key information. And then this idea that they can request the full case study if they want to really dive into the slide deck, and like they can download that because that'll be password protected. In terms of what we want to do now for this, like what is the trailer? This is going to be the trailer, right? So they learn a little bit about what the product is. Immediately, there's a little bit of a YouTube trailer as to like the context of what this product does. So something kind of fun and interactive for them to check out. As they go underneath, this what I was thinking of right now, and this is nowhere near final, but okay, let's talk a little bit about the project details. What went on, what was kind of, dig a little bit deeper into it, maybe have an asset here. Underneath that, just talk a little bit about the research side of things, because I've discussed how important research is to me in like my about section and all of that. Like it's something I hold high value to. Then we go underneath, again, another visual asset to better understand where that research was coming from. Then as we go down a bit further, we sort of immediately start going into final result. And it's not really going to be this screen, but the idea is I'm going to try and put like, I guess it's not too different from a Loom, but almost do like a little screen recording and a few interactions and just have that kind of looping here. So you can really get an idea of the different interactions. And I think it's a nice way to make like, without them having to click some sort of clickable prototype because of the NDA requirements, at least they can sort of have a good idea of like how that flows, and it'll be like this nice big kind of chunky piece. And then underneath a little bit about, those outcomes and everything that was built, etc. And then immediately I'll probably add another CTA to like request a full case study, and then they can view the next work. And if I were, for example, to request this case study, I believe I have to quickly share this tab instead. Yeah. So say, for example, now, and I won't go through this portfolio, but I'll explain a little bit about why or how it looks. Actually, you know what? Let me do it this way. I'll show the difference between the two. Now I'm gonna have to check my passwords if I even remember the password for this. Let's see.
Yeah, I think while Danny's doing that as well. Yeah, like I think what works really well for the website, and I feel like we're still going a little bit back and forth on it, because I think I'm always of the opinion, like especially on website, less is more. But it's that idea, like again, because it's so editorial, because it's almost like you're drawing someone in there, like whoever's looking at this. Again, it doesn't necessarily, like, it could be a recruiter, it could be just someone who's curious about your work, it could be someone who potentially wants to know more about what the kind of work you're doing. Is that kind of you're leading folks like through the content, right? Like it is very like user experience. It actually also in a sense also shows off how, or like the intention is like how you understand user experience, because you're pulling people through the content. You're like you were saying, like there's kind of like call to actions, there's like things that they can like explore and look at. So I think that in itself is like very effective, because the website really, yeah, it kind of is something like maybe at a glance you should be able to just get someone to look at and be curious about. I think I saw a question about what site did you use to build your portfolio? Is it Squarespace?
Great question. Yeah. And I think, wait, sorry, first of all, can we see my Figma now?
Yes.
Okay, cool. I'll get into it in a sec. Yeah, in terms of picking, honestly, Pick what feels efficient for you. There really isn't. In the past, I've worked with Wix, with Webflow, with plenty of different website builders. I think just go with what you feel comfortable with in terms of like rapidly iterating. Especially if there's maybe perhaps like a time, at least that's my thoughts on it. If you feel like, okay, you want to get this done quickly, maybe you want to spend less time learning a new website builder and focus on something that you feel you can, easily, rapidly change. I think another thing, the only reason I chose Squarespace is I happen to have like a free membership coupon and stuff, and I was like, you know what, let's just start with this. But another thing that I think is really important too is it's totally cool to launch off of, at least in my opinion, what do you call it, like a template. If you find a template that matches the vibe that you're looking for and the vibe that you've been sort of curating with your inspiration, it's totally cool to take something like that and then make it your own. But it's great because those templates really do help in terms of structuring certain sections, and you know, you can start playing with that, around with it, and making it more unique if you need to. But at least in my experience, especially in the last year or so, I've been finding so many cool website builders that are really doing like next level stuff, and they're quite, like, I think with AI now too, they're quite customizable really fast. And they also use different forms of design. So you might, you know, my side, I was really focused on making it super responsive and making sure everything collapses and stuff. But now adaptive design is really common, right? So like REMs, and so things, it's more about scaling, so it then works well on mobile and things like that. So yeah, pick whatever you feel is good for you, to be honest. I don't know if you want to add to that, Riz.
No, I don't think so. Yeah, again, I as you said, it's not one size fits all. I think that there is, you know, and as someone who like codes their own website, and like I know lots of folks do that, like hand code. There's on one hand, you know, something to be said about like you're kind of practicing your skills, again, showing your skills and maybe like front end development if you're doing that, and you know, like, you know, coding your own website. But then there's, to me, another thing that I think, and I personally also do it, is like you're almost like you're overworking your website, right? Like, because really what you're trying to do is showcase the work that you've done and your knowledge and your experience. And so if you spend almost like too much time on building kind of like the things around it, you're starting to lose what the content is, right? Like what you want to showcase. So I think, again, not one size fits all. I think it depends on what you're interested in and what you want to do. I mean, I love seeing sites that people hand build. I think that's really cool. But I also have, you know, like seen portfolios where I'm like really impressed, and I'm really impressed by the design and the content, and it is just built on a template, right? Because it's like the template itself is just a holder for the, you know, the really great designs and content that you've worked on.
Exactly, yeah. And I think I find the way, if it sort of depends on what you want. Like, for example, we have ideas, or I have ideas on what I want to do this website, and now I'm like, oh my gosh, there's like, I can't do this on Squarespace, but I know I can do this on Webflow, you know? And I'm like, am I going to like, you will have to naturally adapt to and you know, accept the limitations of what you pick, which is normal. But it actually becomes a pretty fun challenge, you know? Again, if you're like kind of detach yourself from being too close guarded with your ideas, maybe there's a learning to sort of adapting your design with the restrictions of a certain builder or platform or what may have you. So run with it, you know?